Welcome everyone, my name is Xyllow and I'm the only consistent Challenger Warwick Jungle main in the world for the past 4 seasons. I've peaked at rank 22 in Season 12, rank 9 in Season 13 and rank 3 in Season 14. And I played thousands of games of Warwick across every patch, meta shift, jungle rework. And this guide is going to be the result of everything I've learned. So a guide of this sort has been requested for the better part of the last few years. And whether you're a complete beginner or an experienced player looking to push high elo with an underrated jungler, this guide will teach you absolutely everything there is to know about the champ. I'll be covering everything, including why you should play Warwick, basic and advanced ability breakdowns, including hidden mechanics, item stat priorities, summoner spells, rune pages, item tier list and build paths, what's optimal versus situational, optimal first clears and pathing, and of course advanced tips, tricks and bugs that even the best Warwick mains miss, who are, let's say, from Masters to even Challenger. I'm incredibly excited to finally share all the knowledge I've built up over the years playing Warwick at the highest level, and I know that this guide will help you unlock Warwick's full potential and you will dominate your games. So if you enjoyed the content and you want to see more, make sure to follow me on Twitch. I'll be streaming regularly on twitch.tv/Xyllow, and I will be breaking down high-elo gameplay live. And of course, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe buttons because it will help a ton as I continue creating content. Feel free to check out our Discord as well if you're curious about that. We have a very lovely and wholesome community, and I hope you guys enjoy. So why should somebody play Warwick Jungle? Why not pick any other jungler? Or why play him jungle at all? Why not play him top lane? Well, Warwick is one of the most underrated jungler in the game, especially if you understand how to push his limits. He offers a unique combination of sustain, dueling, objective control, lockdown, and other areas which basically makes him insanely versatile, and very few junglers can match that. He's not necessarily the strongest at any one of those things, but he is flexible, and that's what makes him so appealing as a jungler. While many players view him as a low elo pick or just an easy champion, the reality is that Warwick scales with your both mechanical understanding and game knowledge and champion knowledge more than most meta picks. And that is exactly why I've been able to consistently reach Challenger with him. And why most players don't see this true potential, I don't really know. But some of his strengths include insane 1v1 potential. Realistically, if both you and your enemy are full HP and you wouldn't have items, Warwick would simply win against pretty much anybody in the game. He is a monster in early skirmishes. The only way you would lose in combat is because it's never a true 1v1, right? When you're fighting an enemy jungler, for example, the laners are going to roam. But with smart pathing and good auto move click mechanics, Q mechanics, you can pretty much outdeal any meta champ. He has absolutely insane sustain, which means if you survive at very low HP, you can basically go back to full clearing without resetting. If you didn't really get enough gold to have a reasonable back, you're going to be half HP in a few seconds. And even though most junglers nowadays have good sustain, it is on such a level that you can always stay on the map unless, you need to cash out your gold. He has, as I said, a very simple kit, which means it's easy to pick up, right? If you think about it, it's Q does some damage and heals him, W gives him movement speed, attack speed, E reduces damage and fears targets, and ult suppresses one target, right? Passive just does a little bit more damage. If you think about it on that surface level, he's very easy to pick up. He is on a surface level similar to somebody like Trundle, right? One of the easier mechanical champs. But realistically, he has a very deep skill expression and a very high skill ceiling. Even though he's easy to pick up, mastering spacing, timing your Q, perfecting auto move click on this champion, knowing which fights you can sustain, out-sustain, and which you cannot, being able to stick onto your targets when your movement speed is lower than other champions is what makes him difficult, especially in higher elos, but it is very rewarding once you get to that level. He has very reliable global pressure on the map. Basically, if somebody is lucky and they survive on 1 HP, very high chance you're just going to run them down and they're not going to be so lucky anymore. If somebody is low on HP, which is pretty much going to be for half of the duration of the game, people like to fight, especially in solo queue. So he really shines on just absolutely pressuring the map. If he snowballs, he's an absolute pain in the ass to deal with. He has for that reason, high tempo. And if you're smart and don't get baited by obviously bad calls, he's quite low risk, but he does have very little escape, so just something to keep in mind. Even if he falls behind, he has a very strong ultimate ability that he can use to lock down any carry champ on the enemy team. So if you get a good ult off and your team is in a reasonably close vicinity to follow up on the engage, there are going to be fights that you clutch even if you don't do a lot of damage. But I think the biggest strength of this champ is going to be that he is very patch resistant. Warwick likes a lot of different stats. He's a stat and item abuser, which means that even if he gets nerfed, even if one of his builds gets nerfed, doesn't mean all of the builds will. You can always opt out for something different. Even items that are not completely optimal are going to be at least good on him. He can build AD. He could even technically build AP, even though the scalings are worse, right? It is very, very flexible, and there have been few metas where Warwick has been completely unplayable. He always has a spot, even if he's not the strongest jungler. So he is very consistent for that reason to one trick, even, let's say. So whether you're looking to climb fast, learn jungle fundamentals, or outplay people, you know, give them a horrible time, any of those reasons is valid to play this champ. He's also incredibly fun. Like, I'm telling you, I played this champ for 5 years. Almost every single person in my community is a one trick. Like, most Warwick players are one tricks. Very rarely they play different champs. Most of the highest elo Warwick players are one tricks because people realize that this champ is giga fun. Like, it can result in countless hours of fun. But why would we not play him top lane? Because we're not cringe. Warwick top is OP. I'm gonna be honest. I played it. I hit rank 3 last season. It definitely has counters. I think in higher elos, top lane requires a lot of skill. But if you want to be at least fair to your opponents, Warwick Jungle, they cannot complain about Warwick Jungle being OP. He's just very versatile, as I said. And if people are complaining that Warwick is broken when you're playing jungle, they don't know what they're talking about. Low elo players will complain about this champion being broken in low elo. High elo players are going to be like, yeah, this champ is useless. Both of these categories are wrong. Go have some fun with it. So let's start with Warwick's passive Eternal Hunger. Warwick's attacks deal an additional amount of magic damage on hit, which scales with 15% attack damage and 10% ability power, so a slightly better AD scaling. And if Warwick is below 50% HP, he also heals for 100% of the damage dealt by the passive. If he's below 25% HP, the healing is increased to 250% of the damage. So if I, let's say, teleport to the tower, I am below 50% but not 25% HP. You can see I'm healing 29 per hit. And if I take another turret shot, now I'm below 25% HP and I'm healing 74. Right? So a 250% increase, pretty straightforward stuff. Now, once I'm above half HP, there's no more healing from the passive done. Q, Jaws of the Beast. Now, this is a basic attack ability, which means that it benefits from on-hit and on-attack effects, and it has some additional bonuses, right? So you bite the target, and you do a portion of their max health as magic damage, and the damage that you deal, you heal for a portion of it as well. If you max it out, it heals for 75% of the damage dealt, and at level 1, it heals 25% of the damage dealt. So it has two variations. You can either tap it or hold it, and if you tap it, it looks something like this. I release it as soon as I press Q. Or I can alternatively also hold the Q, which will allow me to stick to the target until my Q ends. Now, the portion of the damage dealt and healing done is the same regardless of whether I choose to tap or hold the Q. Whether you want to tap it or hold it is circumstantial, and it's based on the situation you are in. Sometimes you want to just get too close to the enemy, so you're just gonna tap it and perhaps run away after doing a short trade. And sometimes you're chasing down somebody and you want to get on top of them as fast as possible, so you're going to hold down a Q, either the full duration or a certain amount. Now, note that this ability counts as an auto attack reset, like Trundle's Q. So what you can do is, in order to maximize your damage output, very straightforward, you just auto Q, auto. Instead of doing something like Q auto. you're basically missing an auto attack of value in like a short interval. There is no reason for you to open with Q if you're already on top of the target. You should only open with Q if they are out of your range, like if you're chasing them down, because obviously Q range is bigger than auto attacks. Now, a really important part of Warwick's Q is the fact that it makes him displacement immune. And displacement immunity is basically a type of crowd control immunity that allows him to finish his Q without being interrupted against certain abilities. So, for example, if Gragas from over here, let's say, would try to ult me while I'm queuing, if the ult hits me, it will not knock me back. The way you can think about displacement immunity is anything that changes your position. Warwick's W is actually quite a straightforward ability. You get certain bonuses based on enemies being low HP on the map. So you get movement speed steroid and an attack speed steroid against enemies who are below 50% HP, and the steroid gets increased further when they're below 25% HP. Now, the amount of movement speed and attack speed you get scales with leveling up the ability, so it's a core ability to max in the jungle. You get up to 65% movement speed, below 50% HP targets, and up to 110% attack speed. And these bonuses are essentially doubled when they're below 25% HP. The active is actually quite simple. It gives you passive bonuses against targets that are in range. So for example, you can see this dummy is in range for my W. You see this little circle on the minimap around me. And since this target dummy is in range and it's the closest target to me, I will start hunting them, and I will get the bonuses of attack speed and movement speed toward them for 8 seconds. So it treats the target as if it's below 50% HP. You can see that I'm getting the attack speed value. Now that my W runs out, you can see that my attack speed is actually much lower than this. That's because the active ended and the target dummy is not below half HP. But even though my active is on cooldown, my passive still does work and I'm getting a lot of attack speed. Right now the target is very low, below 25% HP, so I'm getting all the way up to 2.09 attack speed with lethal tempo and no attack speed items. Now, an important part to note here is that Warwick can only passively sense enemies who are brought below 50% health by allies, which includes your teammates, yourself, your minions. But this is not entirely accurate, and I will explain why in a second. So basically, if my team is hitting somebody and they drop to below half HP, I will get the bonuses, right? But let's say my teammate hit somebody to around 55% HP, let's say the jungler, for example, and then the jungler decided to go do Gromp. He starts hitting Gromp and he is dropped below 50% HP. The Gromp is not my ally, but because it was my teammate that recently was in combat with him, it counts as if my teammate brought them below half HP. So as long as the enemy has been recently in combat with anybody on your team, again, including champions and minions, you will get the bonuses if they end up crossing that threshold against a neutral monster, let's say. Warwick's E Primal Howl. Very straightforward ability. You gain a portion of damage reduction for 2.5 seconds, and after it ends, you fear nearby enemies. You can also recast the ability to end it early. So for example, I will press E. Now my damage is reduced. If it runs out, the nearby enemy is feared. And if I choose to end it as soon as possible, this will almost instantaneously fear the nearby enemies, but it will also preemptively end your damage reduction. So basically, as soon as the fear goes off, you lose the damage reduction. There is one little trick though that I want to show you that allows you to keep the damage reduction even after going off the fear, and that's if you combo it with your ultimate ability, Infinite Duress. So if I E and instantly ulti, it fears all the nearby targets, but if you pay attention above the ability bar, you can see that I'm still having damage reduction even though the fear went off. So this is just a small little trick that you can do. And finally, we have Warwick's ultimate ability, Infinite Duress. Warwick leaps a huge distance that scales with his movement speed and suppresses the first target hit, and it looks something like this. The target is essentially stunned with a few differences from the regular stun crowd control, and it procs on hit and on attack effects 3 distinct times. So basically, it counts as 3 auto attacks. this will benefit Warwick's passive very nicely and proc its bonus on hit damage 3 times. So for example, in this case, it would do 41 times 3 equals 123 magic damage. And it will also give us 3 lethal tempo stacks. Quite straightforward. Now note that this ability only scales with attack damage. You can see 167% bonus AD scaling, but just like Warwick's passive, Warwick's Q, Warwick's ultimate also does magic damage. So essentially all Warwick's abilities and passives do bonus magic damage, scaling better with attack damage. So that's one thing that's important to note. Also, don't forget that this ability's range scales with movement speed. So if I proc Ghost, W movement speed, Shuralia, and this, I will get absolutely crazy movement speed values. And once all of these bonuses run out, the range is getting reduced. So it's getting constantly recalculated how far the range is. This will also make Warwick's ult shorter range if you get significantly slowed. For example, if you get Nasus W'd or Hui ulted. One of the most important parts of this ability is the fact that Warwick heals for 100% of all damage dealt during the channel. So this includes passives and items and the ultimate itself. So for example, Warwick's passive will be procced 3 times, doing bonus damage on hit, and that will go into the healing calculation. On top of that, Blade of the Ruined King's passive that does % HP bonus physical damage on hit, that will proc 3 times, will also go into the lifesteal calculation. On top of that, we will lifesteal because we have it inside Blade of the Ruined King, and we will also get triple healing if we're like very low HP. So you ideally want to use this ability as low HP as possible to get maximum value, and then you will get some crazy lifesteal that looks something like this. Now, in the following expanded ability rundown, I will mention absolutely everything there is to know about Warwick's abilities, not just the surface level information. And I will also cover all of the changes that have recently hit the Summoner's Rift. That was in patch 14.22 when they reworked a bunch of stuff, plus his W, they remodeled Warwick's size, they changed the attack speed and movement speed values, thresholds, the way W works. They added a new lingering attack speed mechanic, and they also basically they did a bunch of changes that happened in patch 14.22, patch 14.24, and there was also a hotfix recently that increased Warwick's Q cooldown. So I'll go into basically everything that anybody could need to know. There's not really that much to expand on Warwick's passive, as there were, first of all, no changes made recently, and it's quite a straightforward ability. You can see that the description is very small as well. So I'm just gonna go and move straight to Warwick's Q, Jaws of the Beast. So the first thing I really want to expand on for Warwick's Q is his displacement immunity. If we go straight to the official League of Legends wiki and we look at the displacement immunity description, it says that it provides immunity to all airborne effects in addition to suspension, knockdown, kinematic, sleep, and stasis. And even though this is true, first of all, the list is incomplete. And the way I always recommend people to think about this crowd control immunity is as the immunity to having your placement or your location changed. So for example, something like Gragas ultimate knocks you away from the barrel that drops, and that changes your location. So for that reason, Warwick's Q is immune to it. I will just show some examples of some of the interactions. And for example, if REE is a charm, I will not show other charm abilities and how they interact with Warwick Q because it's going to be exactly the same, right? Now, stuns such as Alistar E do not change your location, so there's no reason why Warwick's Q should be immune to it, and he is not. Now, Alistar's Q, on the other hand, is a knock-up, which changes your location to go up in the air. So for that reason, if Alistar tries to knock you up, if you time your Q, you'll be displacement immune. Similarly, Azir ultimate is a knockback, and it changes your location, right? So for that reason, Warwick can Q right through it. Just like that. Now, Warwick is not immune to forced actions. And what I mean by forced actions is crowd control that forces you to do something. So charms force you to walk to the champion that charmed you. Fears cause you to walk away from the champions that feared you. And taunt forces you to attack the target that taunted you. So First of all, to walk to them and then to auto them. So all of these types of CC, Warwick is not immune to. So we can see like if Ahri tries to charm us, we still walk to her and nothing really changes. Now, root CC is a little bit of an edge case because it has two different interactions. If you're already rooted, you will not be able to Q, as you can see here. However, if you are already midway through your Q while holding it, it will allow you to finish the Q animation and only root you afterwards if the root lasts that long, as you can see here. So for example, if there was, let's say, a Caitlyn trap somewhere, and I queued through a champion and through the trap, I would only be rooted after I finished my queue. Because I started my queue while not being rooted, and I only went through the route while in the middle of my queue. Now this will be important against specific interactions that have combinations of crowd control, like Lee Sin ult and Jace E. So you guys will need to remember this. So for example, Blitzcrank Q pulls the target to himself and also stuns that target. So he has a combination of crowd control. Now, because Blitzcrank's Q is a displacement, Warwick will be immune to that portion, but see what happens when Warwick tries to Q you and you Q the minion. So you can see that I wasn't pulled to him, but I was also stunned because I'm not immune to the stun part. Now, sleeps are very interesting. Lilia ult, Zoe E, because they have two parts of the CC, right? First, you're getting drowsy, and then you fall asleep. If you Q before you fall asleep while you're still in drowsy, you will not be immune to the sleep, and you will stay drowsy and then fall asleep. But if you're in the middle of the Q while you're falling asleep, it will be immune to the displacement. For some reason, sleep is coded as a displacement. And you can see here, absolutely nothing happens and you completely negate the crowd control. So Lee Sin ultimate is actually a very interesting one. Intuitively, you would think that Warwick's Q is completely immune to it. But if we look here, we see that I got knocked back even though I pressed my Q. Well, what happened? And now if we look here, this time it didn't knock me back. So what the hell is going on here? Well, if we look at the official Lee Sin Ultimate Wiki, we will see that the description says Lee Sin first roots the target enemy champion over the cast time, and then he knocks them back. If you're already in your Q when he ults you, since Warwick's Q is immune to the root while in Q, he will be immune to the root, and thus after he will be immune to the airborne effect. However, if you try to Q at the same time he presses his R, you first get rooted before you are displacement immune, and thus it doesn't work. So you will not get knocked back by Lee Sin R only if you're already 0.25 seconds. That's like around the interval when the displacement immunity kicks in. And that is the moment where it's like the give or take whether it will work or it will not. And fun fact, Jace E is exactly the same way coded as Lee Sin R. It first roots you and then knocks you back. So if we look here, this time it worked. So just need to get used to it. Now, some of the cooler interactions are something like Mordekaiser R or Bardar. And apparently it doesn't work against Urgot ulti. Now, another really interesting interaction is Skarner ulti. Skarner ult isn't exactly a combination of crowd control. It is a displacement and a suppression. And when it is a combined CC, if you're immune to the displacement, you will also be immune to the suppression. So you can completely counter Skarner R. Now, another thing that's important to note about Warwick's displacement immunity on Q is that it has attachment-like effects, similar to Yuumi W. So you're essentially, while you are in Q, attached to the enemy that you are queuing until your Q ends. So if they try to flash away while you're queuing, you will follow them. If Ezreal tries to leap away with E, it will follow him. If Lissandra tries to run away, it will also follow her. If they are dashing with Pike E, you will follow him. If Zeri tries to E over the wall, it will follow her. Basically, it follows dashes, leaps, everything. You're basically part of the champion. And you will follow them as long as you're holding Q and your character does not turn around. Now, Warwick will turn around when he ends up in front of the target. So essentially, the faster the movement is of the target, the longer you will follow them. So for example, Bard E, when you portal through it, he goes really fast through the portal, right? So I will be behind him throughout the entire duration of the portal. And once he is at the end of it, my Q will finally finish. So my Q duration while holding is not a fixed amount. It can be all the way from 1 to 5 seconds. You can actually even follow people through Hextech portals, even though that is really, really buggy and sometimes it doesn't work. So I'm just gonna show an example here. So Bard is Eing, I'm channeling, I'm still following through the portal. And as soon as I turned around over here, you can see that I'm no longer in my Q and my Q is on cooldown. All right, so now what we will do is we will go through item stat priority. So when meta shifts and new patches come out, different items will obviously become stronger. So one thing that's very important is that we understand what item stats Warwick prioritizes and why, right? Thus, let's start with the best in slot item stats. Attack damage is probably the most important one. We want attack damage as soon as possible into the game. It is S tier because every single ability scales better with AD than AP. We have 15% on the passive, 120% on Q, and ult only has attack damage scaling, right? But you do not necessarily want to overstack it. Attack speed, we want at least a little bit in our builds. The more attack damage you have, the more valuable attack speed becomes, but you do not necessarily want to overstack it. On top of that, on-hit items are much better on Warwick right now than before. First of all, because his base stats were hit quite significantly to compensate for the newly introduced lingering attack speed mechanic, meaning item damage carries Warwick's damage output, as well as because the cap for attack speed was recently increased from 2.5 to 3, which means that much more attack speed is needed to reach the cap even when the target is below 25% HP. Armor and magic resistance are more valuable than health due to the fact that Warwick has a lot of sustain in his kit because of his passive, Q, and R healing, right? The more health you have, the less useful sustain is. If you think about it, because sustain restores amount of health regardless of how many resistances or health you have, having less health that is tankier will be more cost efficient than having more health that is squishier. Health is only useful as an anti-burst or anti-one-shot tool, so you do not want to build too much of it. Therefore, armor and MR are vastly superior. Ideally, you pair these stats with offensive stats like AD or attack speed, but most items that offer armor and MR also gives health, which is fine. So for example, magic resistance and attack speed, there's only Wit's End. For attack damage, it's only Maw and Mercurial. You know, for armor and attack speed, there is nothing, and for attack damage, there's only Death Stance and GA. Most armor and magic resistance items are tank items, which is fine. A little bit of health is never completely wasted. Just keep in mind that we prioritize armor and magic resistance. Tenacity is incredibly useful as for any other melee bruiser. There's not a lot of tenacity items. I believe it's only Wit's End, Sterix Gauge, and Merc Treads. The worst of which is probably Sterix Gauge. Unless you build a lot of HP, which Warwick doesn't want, Sterix Gauge doesn't have a lot of value. And also Elixir of Iron, which is usually S tier, unless the enemies have absolutely no crowd control, in which case we will opt for Elixir of Wrath. Now, movement speed is unbelievably valuable due to the fact that Warwick's base movement speed is one of the lowest in the game, as well as the fact that your W loses all movement speed in combat, which means even a single auto attack removes it, right? We already covered this. So due to the fact that our targets will try their best to kite us, movement speed will help us a lot in fixing that issue, as well as providing us with extra map pressure. Now, the next stats that are useful, can be useful, are armor and magic penetration. So we know that Warwick's passive, Warwick's Q, and Warwick's ult all do magic damage, scaling with the attack damage that you get from your items and your base attack damage, right? Which means your abilities will only do magic damage. However, because Warwick likes to auto-attack a lot, especially if he goes lethal tempo, his damage will be mostly mixed because most of his auto-attack damage is attack damage, right? So both Armor Pen and Magic Pen are useful, but because Warwick's damage is mixed, we want only items that give either both of them or give such a nice amount of them that makes up for the fact that it is only half cost efficient, right? As singular stats, they are only half cost efficient because of that. The only exception is that lethality items are generally really good early game, and because the lethality items give so much attack damage, we could be willing to sacrifice the fact that only his auto attacks, let's say, benefit from it. But realistically, try to avoid this unless the items give both. The only item in the game that gives both armor and magic penetration currently is Terminus, but unfortunately it is more catered towards AD carry. It doesn't give us enough resistances as a melee bruiser as much as we would like, so the stats are not really there to justify building it. But if that were to change, it could be probably the best Warwick item in the game. Heal and shield power can be obviously very good because Warwick has a lot of sustain. Ability haste is useful, but we don't really need it. A little bit of it can be useful, right? It's gonna reduce all of our basic ability cooldowns plus ultimate cooldown. Out of all the abilities, the one we care about the most is your ult ability haste, because you're usually not gonna cast Primal Howl twice in a fight. The amount of times you cast Q will probably not change even if you have like 20 or 40 ability haste. For W, you really do not need it, which means that primarily you want it for ult. So if there are in future meta items that give only ult haste, for example, such an item is Hexblade, theoretically gives everything Warwick likes, right? It gives AD, attack speed, health, which is fine, ult ability haste, and it gives attack speed and movement speed after casting your ult. So solid item, just not very good in the meta right now. Then we have Lifesteal and Omnivamp. Realistically, the more damage you do, the more useful Lifesteal is. But because junglers are usually weaker than top laners, sustain is going to be much more useful in top lane than it is going to be in jungle, but it is not by any means wasted. It definitely can be useful. Just keep in mind that because Warwick has a lot of sustain, enemies usually will buy anti-heal, which means Lifesteal and Omnivamp will lose value. Now, the stats that you should 100% stay away from is critical strike, anything related to critical strike. So critical strike chance, critical strike damage, we don't care about that because Warwick's Q cannot crit, as written here, and Warwick's ult cannot crit, which means the only thing that can crit are his auto attacks, so therefore the stat is basically useless. Ability power we stay away from because the scaling zone attack damage are much better. Mana we don't need in jungle at all. Mana and health regen are also not very useful in jungle especially, but Warwick is a very all-in sort of champ, which means fights generally don't last that long, which means regen from health loses a lot of value. You can usually just sustain in the jungle through your passive and your Q healing, and in the middle of a fight, that regen is not going to do anything. One thing that I will briefly cover are summoner spells. So obviously in jungle, we will take Smite. But for the other option, we don't have too many. So let's ignore Mark and Clarity since these are ARAM specific. Then we have... I will cover the ones that you should not take. I think Barrier for jungle is a bit troll and there are simply better options. You're not really even going to feel that you have it. Ignite is quite cheese, and even though currently, unlike in the past, using summoner spells that do damage does not make you lose your W movement speed. That is, you know, that's a great change, but realistically, as a bruiser, auto attacker, you're not really even going to feel the tick damage. Sure, you can ignite them when they just flash away to like ensure that they die, but most of the time there are better options. Cleanse in jungle you should also not take, and healing in jungle is also not great. Then our remaining options are teleport, ghost, exhaust, and flash. Teleport obviously we don't take in jungle either, nobody does that, it is not good. Flash, ghost are two very viable choices. I personally prefer Ghost, and I do think the higher elo you are, the more value Ghost has, because it fixes Warwick's inherent in-combat movement speed problem. It feels very good, it has shorter cooldown, way shorter cooldown than Flash, and it just feels great when you have it. Also, Warwick does not really need Flash to engage. His ult is already incredibly long range, and the only time you would use it is to run away from a fight. can be useful, but if you're running something like Nimbus Cloak, Ghost is more than enough most of the time. Exhaust is something that I've experimented with a little bit, and I think in lower ranks it is incredible. It is absolutely crazy for chasing down targets, also for running away from targets. It synergizes very well with Nimbus Cloak because it has a 240 second cooldown, and it makes you gain a lot of movement speed in comparison to the target that you're exhausting. It is also incredible at shutting down a target, especially early to mid game, because of the 40% damage reduction. But I do think that Ghost and Flash are a safer bet. But I do think that Exhaust definitely can be good and will win you some games. All right, so let's go through all the runes now. So if we start with Precision Tree, the available keystones are PTA, Press the Attack, Lethal Tempo, Fleet Footwork, and Conqueror. So our default will be Lethal Tempo. It gives stacking attack speed up to 6 stacks. And the reason why it's so good for Warwick is because his Q counts as an auto attack and his ultimate counts as 3 autos. So it's really easy to stack up. On top of that, you get bonus damage based on your attack speed. And since Warwick gains attack speed bonuses because of his W, it synergizes very well. It is not as strong as it used to be in the past, but Warwick is one of the best lethal tempo users in the game. So you can do something like auto Q auto into ulti, instantly stacking it, or just engage with your ulti and then doing auto Q auto. Then our other option is Press the Attack. Press the Attack is solid, better for when you are playing a less carry oriented playstyle and you're playing more for your team, because the whole point is to one-shot one target and then, you know, regroup with your team. So PTA is very, very solid, but if you're trying to 1v9 your games, this will not do nearly as much as Lethal Tempo can. Fleet Footwork is basically useless. There's not a lot of reason why you would take it in jungle. You could consider taking it top lane, but in jungle it doesn't really have a spot. Conqueror, also better in top lane. It gives raw attack damage, which is good, but for extended fights, Lethal Tempo will be stronger. Conqueror will have better burst. In high AD builds, if you're choosing to go a less on-hit oriented build, Conqueror will be as strong as Lethal Tempo potentially. So it is not useless, but generally Lethal Tempo is better. Now for second row, for jungle, your only option is Triumph, since Absorb Life doesn't really do anything, and you don't need mana for jungle. So you're gonna get percent missing health after executing a target and or participating in an assist, and you will also get a little bit of extra gold. Here, Bloodline is the only bad one. The extra sustain you won't ever really feel that much. Alacrity gives you attack speed earlier on into the game, and it helps a lot with your jungle clear speed and overall makes the champion feel smoother. Legend Haste is just worse than Alacrity. Also not useless, but Alacrity is generally much better. The reason we don't take Coup de Grace is because it's overall not a very great rune. Even though Warwick does tend to be strong against low HP targets, you generally kill them anyway. You do not need the bonus of this. Last Stand overall is superior because Warwick thrives while being low on HP. And Last Stand gives the highest potential DPS because of the 11% increase for when you're below 30% HP, right? Cut Down is situationally really good if you're doing anti-tank burst builds. So if you're going something like Bork and Eclipse into a Mundo or a Scion, you can choose to go Cut Down in these situations because your job in those games will be to nuke a tank so they don't pressure team fights as much as they otherwise would, and it allows the team to finish them off when they are lower. For the other rune pages, realistically Precision should be your primary always. You either go Lethal Tempo or Press the Attack. Really, if you want to try Conqueror, you can, but don't recommend it. Here we don't really have a lot of options. Electrocute is buffed this patch, but Press the Attack just tends to do much better than it. Stay away from this. Dark Harvest is useless. Hail of Blades is also useless because it consumes all of your stacks as soon as you press ult. So if you ult a target, your Hail of Blades get consumed and you don't get any value from it since it counts as free auto attacks. Also, if you do auto Q auto, it also counts as free autos and you don't even feel like you got that extra attack speed. It will be just a very slight difference. So basically, in terms of keystones, Domination Tree is not great. Here, the only options are either Cheap Shot bind with your E or sudden impact. Sudden impact being probably your best bet, but the only time sudden impact procs is if you hold your Q. Because if you do not hold your Q, it does not count as a leap ability, right? Also, after your ult, you get a little bit of burst of lethality as well, right? So it's your ult or holding Q. Regarding Vards, other runes are just simply better. Warwick is not a support. He does not have as much mobility in the game as other champions. He cannot go over walls. So prioritizing around setting up vision won't be his strong suit. So we can skip this entire row. Treasure Hunter, nobody usually takes this because it's 450 gold when fully stacked. In the past, it used to be 550, which is a lot of potential gold. 450 is simply not valuable because League is all about snowballing. The first instances of gold, you're getting what, 50, 70, 90, 110, 130. Until you finally get to 450, it's only from the last few kills. So it's not going to help you snowball early. And by the time it scales, it's not gonna make that much of a difference. So it is decent, but nothing special. Relentless Hunter, it loses a lot of value just because Mobies are back in the game. In other words, Symbiotic Souls. For those who don't know what mobility boots are. Symbiotic Souls, they get upgraded into Forever Forward. You get 45 base MS plus 45 out of combat movement speed. Relentless Hunter on top of that loses value. The more and more movement speed you have in the game, the less value it has, simply because of how it is coded. If you want to check League wikis for that and the formulas, feel free. But basically, the more movement speed you buy, the less effective it is, just like with other stats in the game. So not that useful in this meta, but overall can be good. Ultimate Hunter can be very solid. Warwick is incredibly ult dependent, and a ult specific ability haste is more valuable than general ability haste on basic abilities. If we go to sorcery, the only keystone that interests us here is Phase Rush. Arcane Comet and Aerie are more for supports and mages. Phase Rush gives a burst of movement speed after, you know, hitting a person with free attacks or separate abilities. So your ult will automatically proc Phase Rush because it counts as free on-hit effects. And for that reason, it can be quite nice. The problem is Warwick has quite over-nerfed the base stats. He lost some AD back to compensate for the new attack speed transfer on that targets mechanic. And because of that, the precision tree just tends to do much better. But situationally, if you know the fights are not going to be that long, or it's in a counter matchup where you will really struggle and your whole point is just to play around your team, pressure the map, not really care about your damage, just provide utility with your E and ult, you can choose to go movement speed page, something like Phase Rush. Then you will take Axiom Arcanist. We don't want. It's not that great on Warwick. Mana Flow Band is also useless in jungle. So we go Nimbus Cloak. It's a very, very decent rune for Warwick. It gives a burst of movement speed after using a summoner. So, you know, more in combat pressure, allows us to run away in unfavorable fights. Then we're going to take Celerity. Celerity is a very, very good rune for Warwick because it increases movement bonuses. So all the W bonuses will be increased by 7% whenever you're out of combat, allowing you to chase people around the map much smoother. It definitely beats Absolute Focus and Transcendence in this regard, since Transcendence just gives basic ability cooldowns, which we don't care too much about. And Absolute Focus can be decent, but generally we thrive when we are lower on HP. Warwick gets bursted by the enemy team quite fast because everybody knows Warwick needs to get one shot, so he won't stay in this threshold for too long. For that reason, this is just far superior. And then here, Scorch is just not great. You're only gonna proc it with Alt Q. This doesn't really do anything. Gathering Storm, well, Warwick's not really a hyperscaler or anything like that. He's not as bad late game as people think, but there is no reason to run this page. I have experimented with it a little bit. It is not completely useless. If you do get to that point, the raw 29 AD can feel very significant. 99% of games are decided way before this point, so realistically, just go water walking. You'll get bonus movement speed and adaptive force in the river. Now, for Resolve Tree, for jungle, there is nothing good here for keystones. For top lane, sometimes in matchups where you're trading, it is not possible against specific champions to gain extended patterns. So for example, a Renekton, you will usually Q him and he will just use 2 E charges to run away, and you won't be able to like take an extended trade, right? So in those matchup, Grasp can be good, but for jungle, nothing great here. Demolish, also a top lane rune mostly. Shield Bash, we don't have any shields. Font of Life, our E is a long cooldown I mean, Font of Life itself has a 20-second cooldown, so this could possibly be the only jungle-specific rune, but all the time we don't really take this because there are better options. Conditioning is a bit over-nerfed. It gives armor and magic resist and increases armor and magic resist by 3%. This is a good Warwick rune, but overall the stats are just not great. You only get a bonus after 12 minutes, and even then it doesn't really seem that worthwhile. Second Wind is not that great in jungle. It's more for sustaining in lane. And bone plating is great against matchups where you know you will lose unless you take this. So some matchups in jungle are very difficult, like for example Volibear, and taking bone plating plus revitalize here can be very good at surviving bursts and then simply out-sustaining with bonus revitalize healing. So as I said in final roll, unflinching is not great on Warwick and overgrowth is not great. Revitalize is just amazing. You get bonus heal and shield power. Almost everything in Warwick's kit heals him, so it's a kind of a no-brainer. Then the final tree is Inspiration. So for Keystones, First Strike, Unsealed Spellbook, and Glacial Augment are all terrible. Hextech Flash for jungle, I mean, unless you're doing something for fun, doesn't really have value. Cashback, it doesn't give enough. You need to get full build every game to get like decent value from it. And Warwick is more about snowballing than raw gold at some point into the game. He wants to consistently be strong at every stage of the game, and investment runes just struggle in this meta. Magical footwear is simply outperformed currently by Nimbus Cloak and Celerity. It is actually not worth accepting the fact that yes, it will cost you 300 gold less because you get free boots, and those boots also get a little movement speed upgrade, but getting % movement speed bonuses as soon as the game starts can decide games almost always. On top of that, if we choose to go magical footwear in our secondary path, we will also not get access to Nimbus Cloak because the other rune pages in Inspiration are not amazing. We're not going to take Biscuits. We're not going to take Triple Tonic because these are lane runes, and neither Time Warp Tonic, right? So this does not interest us. The only thing that could interest us is this row. So approach velocity is bad because we're not continuously seeing targets to get movement speed towards them. It isn't completely useless because, as we said, Warwick tends to struggle in combat with his movement speed and he can get kited. However, there are enough base movement speed items in the game to fix this problem that there is no real need for approach velocity. There are simply better options. Cosmic Insight is decent for junglers, right? You get Summoner Spell Haste, which means more access to your smite, as well as your primary spell, such as Ghost or Exhaust, whichever you take. And Jack of all trades. I've experimented with this a little bit. So you can get... This rune page is... sorry, not rune page. This rune, Jack of all trades, is only useful if you gain 25 bonus adaptive force. So you need 10 stacks. 10 adaptive force is very minuscule. It's like 5 or 6 AD. So you're not really gonna feel it at all. But 25 is basically 15 AD. If you can get to this threshold without making your build wacky by building suboptimal items, it could be potentially worth. I've seen some people build it. I've experimented with it myself. There are some items that instantly give a lot of stats. So for example, Glacial Buckler that builds into Frozen Heart, I think gives like free stats as well. Then there's Merc Treads that also give free stats. You can buy something like a Dark Seal, you know, but Warwick doesn't prefer AP as much. It is simply, there are better ways to get to this attack damage. I'm not saying it's useless, but in this meta, there aren't easy and consistent ways to get to this threshold. Basically, your basic rune page will look like this. You will go either Lethal Tempo, PTA, or Conqueror, but I really recommend Lethal Tempo. Triumph, Alacrity, default usually will be Last Stand or Cut Down situationally. And then for secondary, there are 4 options, let's say. You can try Sudden Impact and Ultimate Hunter. Most common one, and probably the best one in my opinion right now because of how strong movement speeds are, Nimbus Cloak and Celerity. Then for heavy melee matchups where Warwick Sustain gains more weight rather than Kitey comps where you're not going to be autoing as much, a lot of value into not getting one-shot will have for bone plating and revitalize. So situationally can choose to go this. If you do go bone plating and revitalize, highly recommend rushing Blade of the Ruin King as a first item because it will have very good synergy with this, since lifesteal also benefits the heal and shield. And then finally, for inspiration, you would go magical footwear and either Cosmic Insight or Jack of all trades, depending on what build you're running. Now for the shards, we always want to take, for jungle specifically, we always want to take attack speed. For top lane, you either take adaptive force or attack speed. Both work because top lane, you have actual potential to one-shot your enemies. Attack speed feels much nicer for clearing jungle, and overall, it gives more DPS and smoothness to the champion. It feels way less clunky to play, and 10% attack speed has more value than 5 adaptive force on a champion like Warwick, who depends on hitting a lot to benefit for his passive. Here, 2% movement speed is not worth sacrificing 9 adaptive force for, so you will always take this. Warwick already doesn't have a lot of AD. And because you're a jungler, you should never really take early game health. Sometimes this will make a difference and you might die because you take scaling health, but if you do a first full clear, you are already level 4. Most of the games you will be full clearing, you're already at 40 health. So you gotta ask yourself, am I willing to sacrifice potential 115 HP for 25 health early game? If you think you are, might as well take it. This has place in it as well, but I think this is more for solo laners than for junglers. Tenacity and slow resistance, 10% is not enough. This is not good. And I think most people do not take it for that reason. So before we go through the builds for patch 2509, we will go through all of the items that currently exist, all of the completed items, and we will make a tier list so we know what items we should stay away from. So we can start with Xyllow S. Automatically, it has ability power, so it will go straight to D tier for me. And I think Despair is an item that Warwick cannot really stack up. If the meta eventually changes and he starts building tankier, it will potentially have a spot, but Warwick does not last as long in team fights as actual tanks, so this is one of the worst tank options. Clinic Recurn is a very solid anti-burst tank option. It is situationally S tier. The only reason I'm putting it A is because not always will the enemies have so much burst of magic power where this will be best in slot, but it is probably the most consistent one. I would actually even put it into S tier. Trailblazer, that's a support item. We're not too interested in it. Guardian Angel, it is simply weak in this meta, but it is a strong Warwick item. For that, I'm willing to put it into lowest B tier, just because of the fact that enemies tend to focus Warwick hard in team fights. The problem is Ingenious Hunter was removed from the game. Now there's a 300-second cooldown on your next the next time J becomes available. So there are situations where you could build it. I recently had a game against Cho'Gath, Viego, and Renata that revolve around executes and resets. So if you want to counter a team like that, it could have a place, but overall simply the item is just not that strong. You're spending a lot of gold for little AD and resistances and just a very, very strong passive for Warwick. Infinity Edge, we're gonna put into D tier because his abilities do not crit. Mortal Reminder, it does give crit, but it gives both anti-heal and armor pen. I will put it into C tier, but I do see it having value in 1 out of 1,000 games if they pick like triple tanks stacking raw armor against you, and maybe they potentially heal a lot, maybe like a Mundo with Tormail and Unending Despair, and then a Shen as well situationally. But most games this is just not great. It gives crit, not a lot of AD, and only armor pen, not magic pen. Lord Dominic's, same thing. It gives crit chance. We don't really ever build this. This is probably going to go into D tier. Phantom Dancer, D tier. Z-Keys is situationally A tier. I would even put it overall A tier. It gives armor, magic resistance, health. It is a support item that is very cheap. I believe it is 2,200 or 2,300 gold. All right, sorry, Zeke's Convergence. Zeke's Convergence is A tier. It is only 2,200 gold, gives 25 armor, 25 magic resistance. It gives some health, but not too much. So it gives a little bit of resistances, which we like. It is cheap, and it has an insanely strong passive, which after casting your ultimate, enemies are not able to move. They are slowed by a lot and makes Warwick impossible to kite. On top of that, Z-Keys has been bugged for almost 2 years now, I believe, where all slows in the game are not supposed to stack with each other. For example, if you get slowed by Nasus W and Zillion E, the stronger of the two will simply be used in the calculation, and you will be slowed by the stronger slow. However, Z-Keys slows on top of other slows. So if you build something like Stride Breaker and you use the active and you also press ult, they will get slowed by like 60%. It is ridiculous. If you go a stride breaker build, if you really want to build Tiamat items, even though it's not as good as it used to be, Zeki's can be really, really solid as a solo anti-Kai tool. Sterak's Gauge is not a great Warwick item, unfortunately, because even though it gives tenacity, it gives AD, the stats are not great. It is expensive, and the passive gives bonus AD equal to 45% base AD. Warwick's base AD is bad. It is actually much lower than other bruisers, so there are better ways to not get one-shot. One of the best alternatives in the game is Maw, which gives both AD and magic resistance, right? It will give much more AD than whatever this passive gives. And sure, you're not going to get the passive, but the shield scales with your health, and we don't really build health items. Spirit Visage is good on Warwick, but he prefers attack damage and resistances. In almost all situations, I tend to choose Maw of Malmortius instead of Spirit Visage. And if I already have that, I don't want to build another magic resistance item. If I need that much magic resistance, I will go either Kainik, because it has the highest raw MR value, or I will go Jackshaw. So I think this is deserving of low B tier just because of the synergy with Warwick, but as I said, Maw is just always better. Sunfire, it is just not great in the meta, and even worse on Warwick. Black Cleaver. The problem with Black Cleaver is that it only gives armor pen. It gives a bit of ability haste, a bit of health, a bit of AD. So we don't really need the health. We don't really need the ability haste. And we need both armor and magic pen to be in an item. This only gives one of them. This is more for your team. And also Warwick only has single target damage unless he goes... For Black Cleaver to stack it up, you need consistent DPS on a lot of targets, usually, right? So maybe you would want to get it with Titanic Hydra, which is also bad right now. So not great. Bloodthirster, simply C tier. I do like the fact that it gives an insane amount of AD, but the lifesteal is more valuable in top lane. For jungle, there are just better items to build than this. Hexblade can be good for jungle, simply having your ult on shorter CD, but this only synergizes well with other like health items. If you did a full health build like Titanic Bloodmail, Hexblade, Sterak's Gauge, something like that. But overall, you can even do this with like on-hit items. The problem is the stats are not there to like prove its value. The ult CD is very good, but everything else, sure, the movement speed feels nice in combat and extra attack speed. They're just better items. Ravenous Hydra in jungle is just not great. Thornmail, very solid tank option if enemies have a lot of AD and healing. Situationally, Thornmail is very solid A tier, but if they don't have a lot of AD champs, it is better to buy Kempunk. If they do have a lot of AD champs but not a lot of healing, there are better armor items. So situationally A tier. Trinity Force, simply too squishy, expensive, and not enough damage to justify itself. It is a good Warwick item in the sense that it gives phage effect. It's just not that strong in itself. If the item got more buffs, I would consider building it, but it's just too expensive. Warwick loves to power spike more. Varmox is not great. It only gives health. Neither is Heartsteel. Hurricane is not great. Static Shiv is amazing. Now, this seems like a very troll item, but if you look at the stats, it gives solid amount of attack damage and attack speed and movement speed, which are all the stats that Warwick loves, for only 2,700 gold, on top of the fact that the passive helps a lot with the clear speed. Now, clearing jungle, usually the weakness of Warwick only having single target DPS is fixed by buying Tiamat, but all Tiamat items are not in the meta. Static Shift fixes this. I do think that this item is incredibly strong, and it feels really good as a first item. It also has a good build path, so on your first full clear, you can buy a pickaxe, and then on your next back, you either finish it, or you finish your boot, and then buy another component, and then next time you finish the item. It just feels very smooth, and it feels very rewarding to finish it. Yes, if you do rush this item, because the cooldown of this scales from 8 to 12, it starts getting reduced. So the shortest cooldown, I think it's 10 seconds, yes, at level 12. After that, it like stays that way. Yes, the cooldown is bigger early game, but it doesn't matter. It is still worth it, and it feels great. I think this is a solid S tier item. Would even put it above here. AP, we do not care about. Witsend is not that much in the meta right now, but against crowd control that you cannot block, for example, against Twisted Fate or Fiddlesticks, where the CC is basically guaranteed. Because it gives all the stats of Warwick lives, it gives on hit, it gives magic resistance, it gives attack speed, it gives tenacity. Wits End is very solid. So for that reason, I would put it situationally in A tier. I would lean more maybe towards B tier just because it's not meta, but if I'm like comparing it to Tormail, I think it's definitely on par, if not even better. Rapid Fire Cannon, don't even know if you can build it as a melee. Maybe you can, but not that great. It gives crit and really not many stats. AP. Redemption, I mean, it gives heal and shield power. You can heal your team. It can be in for fun builds used. It's probably gonna be better than Unending Despair, I would say, or Mortal Reminder, but overall, you know, this is more for fun builds. Warwick is a selfish champ, so making himself weaker by buying Night Soul is not a good idea. Frozen Heart is a very strong, very solid B tier. Situationally A tier, but nowadays almost always against AD carries, most AD carries will go a lot of crit, so randoms will simply be much better. But I guess if they have a lot of auto attackers, Frozen Heart can be good. So I guess situationally you can put it in A tier. I just genuinely, very rarely in today's meta find a place to use it. I think that comps where Frozen Heart is good, Ninja Tabbies is also really good, and it genuinely does maybe enough, I would say. So maybe I'll put it like high B tier, even though the item itself gives a lot of armor for very little gold, and we know that Warwick likes to power spike. I'll put it lowest A tier. AP. Okay, let's look at Ginsus. So Ginsus is a very, very good item. It is, the problem with Ginsus is that you want other items that synergize with it, but if you already have those, your build is going to be very squishy. So in my build that I'm doing, I love to do Static Shiv into Kraken Slayer, at which point Ginsus would give the highest bonus DPS. But then you're playing the game with free on-hit items and you're very susceptible to getting one-shot. Going Ginsus after Static Shiv is not worth it. Going Ginsus after Kraken Slayer is kind of worth it, but Static Shiv is much better as a first item. So it's like there's always usually better defensive items that you can buy to make sure you don't get one shot, but in terms of raw DPS output, this item is very strong. I love Ginsus in the jungle. I think that in today's meta with Warwick's AD nerfs, like the bonus on hits, it feels like a different champion once you finish this item. Mercurial Scimitar, it gives magic resistance, a bit of lifesteal, and AD. But because Warwick is not an ADC, you're a bruiser. Once you engage, you might get card controlled by a lot of abilities. Some of them might be knockups, knockbacks, or whatever. QSS won't have that much value as tenacity, simply because you are going to be easier to lock down with CC abilities than an AD carry that's playing in the backline would. That is why the QSS bruiser item that was called Silvermere Dawn, I believe, was removed from the game. It was a much better option for Warwick, but for that reason, it's like C tier. Yumu isn't useless. I think in this meta, it's probably better than all of these items, simply because it gives movement speed early game. Lethality is very strong early game. It has decent clear speed. It's only 2,800 gold, and it gives out of combat movement speed, plus an active movement speed, which makes you hard to kite in fights. So it has a lot of strengths. It's simply that Static Shiv and Kraken Slayer do more DPS. Static is even cheaper than Yumus, but it's not useless. It is definitely not useless. I think you have the most possible impact early game. If you can guarantee snowballing, this item is fantastic, but if you don't, then it loses a lot of value very fast. Randuin's is the best feeling armor option in the game. It has the strongest defensive passive against crit units, so you reduce damage from crit chance by 30%. So even if they build armor penetration, it does not really matter, because this value itself will not be reduced by armor pen, because it's a damage decrease, not an armor increase, if that makes sense, right? So only spending 2,700 gold, you're getting up to 75 armor, which is a lot. You get a slow that makes you harder to kite. This is probably the least important bit, but it can also help sometimes. And this is why we build it. It is just insanely good against AD hyper carries. It works fantastic as a solo tank item, even though it also gives health. It's just very strong. I'm surprised that not more champions actually build it, because in my opinion, it's probably the best armor item in the game on almost anyone. Rocket Belt AP, we don't care. Bork is very, very solid. I will put it into S tier because it works fantastic as a single DPS item. So against comps where other tank items sound very good, for example, imagine playing against Master Yi and you just want to rush Frozen Heart and they have like other free auto attackers in the game. I'm like, wow, I want to get Frozen Heart as soon as possible in this game so they don't get to play and we get every single objective, right? Bork is fantastic as a single damage item. It is the only item that after you build it as a first item, you can build any tank item that you want. Otherwise, with other items, you would have to always go 2 DPS items, or your clear speed and your DPS output against champs is going to suffer significantly. That being said, it has been over-nerfed. It is expensive. Sustain is less valuable in jungle than top, so it is much worse than before, but it is still situationally very solid depending on what builds you go. It's also much easier to pilot in lower elos. So for that, I think it's deserving S. Maw is a fantastic item. I love building Maw when they have decent magic damage, but not so much burst that I will get one shot through the shield. The synergy with Warwick's passive is insane. It gives a lot of AD. It's not too expensive. I believe it's 3,300. I meant 3,100, I wanted to say. It gives 60 AD, 40 MR, and 15 ability haste, and a very, very strong passive that synergizes Warwick's passive. So I think it's deserving of S tier. It is my favorite magic resistance item when they don't have a scary amount of AP damage, in which case I would opt for Clinic Recurrent just to make sure I don't get one tap. Zonias is the only AP item I don't automatically consider putting into D tier just because of how good the active is with Warwick. Problem is, it gives a lot of AP, it's very expensive, and the stopwatch component, which is called Armseeker's Guard or something like that, it's 1,600 gold and it has a Zonias effect, and the full item is 3,250 gold. It's very expensive. They made it so that not everybody would abuse this item as much as they did in the past when it was a stopwatch meta, if people still remember that. So in this meta, it is unfortunately high D tier, but if this ever changes and these items become cheaper, it gives less ability power and more armor, it could go all the way up to A tier. Shojin, unfortunately, even though Warwick instantly stacks up Shojin's 4 stacks when he ults, because Warwick's ult actually counts as 6 instances of damage, 3 being your on hit effects and 3 being your passive effects. The passive itself gives basic ability haste, which we don't care about too much, and passive works on other champs that rely on abilities more, much better than for us. The build path isn't great, it's pretty expensive. It gives health, it gives not too much AD. There are better champions to use this. Maw is just bad. Umbral Glaive I would put into low B tier. I have not experimented with this item, but I can see from the stats that it is potentially a really solid first item, except for the fact that movement speed is too valuable in the game, so I would always opt for Yuma's Ghostblade instead. But for 2,500 gold, getting 55 AD, 15 lethality, it's very good. Also, they recently made it so that Warwick does not get attack speed on wards anymore, so clearing wards is very annoying unless you have a lot of attack speed in your build. So it is very, very decent. Warwick relies on enemies not having vision on him to getting better angles for his ult, so I would definitely put this into at least B tier. Hullbreaker is more meant for top lane. Locket is not great. I think Mikhail's gives a lot of, I would put it close to Redemption, I guess, because it gives a lot of like heal and shield power. Terminus is situationally best B tier item. It has all the stats Warwick wants, but stats just don't justify themselves building it most of the time. If you're against a lot of tanks, it is an A tier item, but because of how rarely this item seems good in the games that I've had, at least, I'm gonna put it into B tier. Ardent Sensor, not great. Essence River, not great. Deadman's a very solid B tier item, but I am personally not a fan of it in jungle because it doesn't give any damage. Only for like 1 proc of passive, where Warwick can do much more just by, you know, using ult, auto Q, auto. Like raw AD is gonna feel better, and the extra movement speed out of combat, I feel like the current Mobis give more than enough. So I would put it maybe here. I know a lot of Warwick players like it, but unless they have a lot of slows and you're planning on going Swifties, it goes very well with Swifties against high slow teams. So like for that reason, I'll put it as a best B tier item. But other than that, there are just better options in my opinion. Titanic Hydra is just really bad right now. Every time I build it, I regret it. Damage is weak. Yes, it gives some tankiness early game, but might as well just go resistances at that point as a second and third option instead of cucking your whole early game damage just by rushing this item. Edge of Night, I'll put it lowest C tier. Can be maybe good against like a very specific comp that has 1 CC, so you don't get insta ult cancelled, but stats are not that great to justify building it most of the time. Support items we are going to ignore. Force of Nature I will put as an A tier item just because there aren't a lot of comps where it doesn't get outperformed by Kainic. Fights don't generally last that long, but there are enemy champions that help you stack it a lot. For example, Mel's Q insta fully stacks it, or you know, Udyr constantly has his ult around him, so it's also very easy to stack it. Basically, if it's easy to stack, it is insanely good. It gives the highest amount of magic resistance, plus it gives movement speed. But usually fights are not that long. Kainic will just be better. AP, Dev's Dance is the best solo tank item, which is also an aggressive item because it gives 60 AD. It is very expensive, but if you have no resistances in your build and you're just going full glass cannon build, Death Stance is very, very good. But if you're going a lot of resistances, Death Stance loses value because Warwick does not have great means at sustaining the damage in the combat unless there's like a minion wave nearby where you can constantly queue through it, because Warwick does not participate in that many kills usually to constantly get the Ignore Pain's passive to cleanse the DPS. In current builds, he has less AD than before. Also, the fact that it makes you stay in combat longer means your W does not kick in to chase low targets from after the fight. So it has its weaknesses as well. I think that depending on the build, it is A tier, but usually, yeah, I would say it's A tier. I think it's A tier. Chempunk is situationally good if they have a lot of healing and if they have a lot of healing but not a lot of AD damage. If it's like Vladimir or something, Chempunk can be very solid, but it is quite expensive, and if you don't build Stridebreaker, it is going to be very hard to apply it on multiple targets. This is mostly going to be when enemies have 1 or 2 healing champions that you want to focus in a fight. If enemy has a Soraka, the only way you can apply it to everyone is by using Stridebreaker and Chempunk. So realistically, that is why it struggles as an item, because Stridebreaker isn't that insane either. But if you build that, you might as well go Chempunk as well. Sundered Sky gets outperformed by other bruiser items. Warwick's Q cannot even crit. AP, support items. Okay, Stridebreaker is the best utility early game. Plus damage, plus jungle clear speed. For that, I will put it into A tier, but it is 100 times weaker than it used to be. The stats are weak. You're going to do way less damage than with other builds. With Warwick losing early game base stats, it struggles even more than before. So I will put it into A tier just because of how much easier it makes the champion feel for people who are not comfortable with it. It has great synergy with Bork as a single damage item. Bork compensates for the fact that Stridebreaker doesn't do a lot, and then you use Stridebreaker utility to keep. So if you're doing the low elo Bork and Stridebreaker build, it is very good. But I do not run it in my games anymore. AP, Iceborne Gauntlet is probably better than Deadman's in my opinion. It gives us low, decent armor, decent health, not too expensive. Sheen proc. Hollow Radiance, also same problem as with Sunfire. Hollow Radiance is just better than Sunfire right now in meta, I believe, but it is just not a great Warwick item. Jack Show is kind of fantastic, but it is not strong enough to put into A tier. It is a great Warwick item, but it's a bit over nerfed. It is expensive, but it still works wonders as a single tank item. Kraken Slayer is amazing. I absolutely love it. It is good in the meta. It gives movement speed, gives a lot of AD, a lot of attack speed, not too expensive, 3,100 gold, and very decent damage. Honestly, very decent damage. Synergy with Static Shiv is fantastic. Shield Bow is not great. Collector is not great. Eclipse just gets outperformed by Bork, but in builds where they have a lot of tanks with a lot of HP, Bork and Eclipse synergy is absolutely insane if you take cut down as well. Cyrilda is just not great on him. item. Serpents is situationally good if you have Stridebreaker. If you can apply the anti-shield to everyone, situationally it's good because it's cheap, it gives decent AD, and yes, sure, you lose a little bit on the damage side, but some comps you just have to build it. Like if they have a lot of shields and nobody else on your team can or wants to build it, you have to. You simply have to, even though it gives late game lethality, since you're only going to be building it like 4 for 5th item anyway. Axia Mark, not great. Hubris, really not great. It's just Warwick wants to have damage on his primary target. His goal is to one-shot one target. You only get AD after killing that target, at which point the fight is already either won and it's a cleanup, or it's already over, so you're not going to get value from it. So I'm putting it into D tier. I've seen some people experimenting with it, saying it gives a lot of AD, sure, but it just does not synergize with what Warwick's identity is in fights. Profane, I will put into solid B tier. I think there is a very decent build for raw DPS. If enemies don't have a lot of kiters, especially in lower elos where kiting is less of a problem, a very solid build is Profane, Bork, and Eclipse. It has insane burst, and you basically annihilate squishies. Not great, not great. Abyssal Mask is just not in the meta, but it's not a bad Warwick item per se. Bimblewinter is not good. This is not good. Mana Immune is... I have a theory that in top lane it might be one of the best Warwick items. For jungle, there's not really a moment where you can build it because jungle is all about snowballing and not falling behind. So for that reason, I will put it into high C tier. Navori gives crit, we don't care about that. Blood Mail would only be good with a Titanic build. Not great AP. I mean, stacked Magi's is nice because it gives movement speed, but Warwick dies too much to make full use of it. And Navori is not great. Realistically, it gives crit. We don't want this. Warwick is too stat dependent. Right, so now we will go through all the possible builds for patch 25.09. Let's start with boots, actually. I think for the next patch, Symbiotic Souls, they will give 45 movement speed. They will actually surpass Swifties because Swifties will lose 5 movement speed. They will cost 1,000 gold while Symbiotic cost 900. And once they souls upgrade, we will get empowered recall. The Voidborn passive will be removed until it is upgraded. However, for only 500 gold, if you get feats of strength, you'll be able to upgrade to get 8% total movement speed, which is the most insane thing Warwick could possibly get. And I know Swiftness boots, once upgraded, instead of getting 4% total movement speed, will gain Adaptive Force, which will get converted to attack damage for Warwick. It will get converted to Adaptive Force based on how much movement speed you have. But the problem for Warwick is that once you're in combat, you lose a lot of movement speed. So this passive will lose a lot of value. So I think that Swifties will actually become worse than all of these 3 options. We know that Sork shoes are bad, Ionian shoes are bad, Berserker Greaves are bad. But the remaining options, these are all still going to be viable. Against high slow teams, you will still want to get Swifties. But in all other cases, against high D champs, amount of auto attackers, you will go Steel Caps. Against a lot of crowd control, you will go Merc Treads. But in most of your games, I think you should go Symbiotic Souls next patch. It will simply be better than the other options. For defensive items that give both armor and magic resistance, your only options are Jackshow and Zekies realistically. Zekies for anti-kiting, Jackshow for highest amount of survivability in fights that work better with a lot of offensive items in your build. But situationally, all the other options are significantly better. So against Magic Burst, Maw will be great. Against Crowd Control, and if you have more attack speed items, Wit's End will be great. It works very well with Static Shiv and Kraken Slayer builds. Against Burst as well, if they have 2 hyper carries on magic damage, Kainic Rukern can be a very solid option if you're scared of getting one shot. Against fights where you can easily stack it, will take Force of Nature. Visage, if you're a little bit lower elo, you can utilize, but I think Maw is usually just better. And for AD comps, against AD champions, at least when you itemize, if they have 2 crit champions, you automatically always go Randuin's Omen. But if their singular crit champ is either a hyperscaler or is snowballing in the game, so Draven Jhin, anything of the sort, you should probably build a 3rd item after your 2-item opener. Against high sustain AD champs, Tormail, you know, if none of the other options are good, maybe Frozen Heart is. Maybe you want the utility against Kiters with Iceborne Gauntlet, but if neither is the case, Dev's Dance is very, very solid as a single anti-tank option. Now for situationals, I covered, we realistically sometimes build these items, but most of the time we won't. Tiamat items, in terms of Tiamat item tier list, Stride Breakers remains still the best one, but you kind of rely on Blade of the Ruin King to do the damage. I think that rushing Bork is actually better than rushing Stridebreaker, because spending 3,300 gold or on this little damage, you will simply not have that much impact. You will simply not have that much impact. If you really want to rush a Tiamat item early game, best thing to do is to start the game with a pickaxe, and if you got a kill with another longsword, it will have more value than the passive on Tiamat. Once you have enough AD, Tiamat becomes stronger, and once you finish Profane, it's a very decent item. So if you want to finish a Tiamat item as soon as possible and you think you're going to be farming a lot that game, because Pickaxe is severely better than Tiamat, you can opt into on your first back getting Pickaxe and then on your second back finishing Profane. Titanic and Ravenous, generally just stay away from it. Now, if you're playing against very tank heavy team that builds a lot of HP, or in comps where they have a lot of CC and you're not going to be moving a lot, and they have strong bruisers that tend to one-shot you. One such example would be Pantheon is very annoying, and you're not gonna win long fights against him because he's just gonna nuke you down too fast. So what is really nice in that situation is once he bursts you, to sustain with Bork and Eclipse Shield and make him go from 100 HP to 50% HP just by pressing your ulti if you take cut down as well. So it's very synergistic with Profane as well, and then you can go simply some defensive boot option like Steel Caps to not get one shot. For low elo, you just want to go Stridebreaker Bork every single game until you learn the champion. I recommend maybe even doing Stridebreaker because people are not that great. The stats will matter less, and you can focus more on AFK farming, so you get used to the jungle as a role as well. And then you can just do Stride into Bork into defensives. It's very, very solid. You can go Tornmail because it's cheap and gives a lot of armor. You can go Maw as well, because if you already have Tornmail, you don't really need that much raw resistances for the MR just fine, and you will survive on low HP very, very easily, and then you can finish off with a Jaxor or something like that. In comps where enemies don't have a lot of CC and they refuse to group and everybody is all around the place, your team does not listen to your calls, what you can do is you can start split pushing and just go full on hit items. But overall, if you try to force this every single game, you will int yourself more than you will help yourself. It is insane single target DPS. On a side lane, one person cannot hope to handle you, and usually even two people will struggle. But in team fights, you will just get one shot. So if the game is not very teamfight oriented, which will usually only be the case for lower ranks, you can look to build something like this. The build that I am running every single game that I think is the highest impact plus damage plus utility, basically has everything, is going to be Pickaxe on your first back, getting Symbiotic Souls on your second back. So, you know, after your first full clear, you have 900 gold, which is perfect for a Pickaxe if you don't get any kills. On your next back, you're going to want to get Symbiotic Souls and start stacking them instantly. And your first item will be Static Shiv. Then we go Kraken Slayer. So at this point, Warwick is squishy. And if you're snowballing really hard and you're not scared, you have a lot of levels, let's say, and you're not scared of getting one shot, you see that enemies are playing bad and there's constantly a lot of picks to be made on the map, Ginsu's is gonna literally double your damage. It will literally feel like it's doubling your damage. It is gonna be an insane free item power spike. In reality, most of the time, you're going to want to get defensives as a third item. So you're going to get Randuins as the best anti-armor option if they have good crit champs, or Maw as a strong DPS plus resistance. Another option, if you really want to go Ginsu's after the defensive, going Kainic is very good because it's gonna, for 2,900 gold, it's gonna give you 80 magic resistance. It will also give you a magic shield. So it's a very, very good solo tank item from the magic resistance category. So if your plan is to build Ginsu's that game as soon as possible, and they have a lot of magic damage, Kainic Recurrent can be great as third, and then you go Ginsu's fourth. Same for AD. If Randuin's is great third, then you can go Ginsu's fourth. If they have a nice mixture of a team and you go Randuin's third, then you probably need to go another tank item as a fourth option, and then finish with Ginsu's as a last item. So it's all realistically team dependent, right? So the general build will be Symbiotic Souls into Static into Kraken every single game. Ginsu's if you're confident. Otherwise, either Randuin's, Kainic, Maw, Tornmail, something like that. Maybe Death Stance And then if you still need more resistances, give one more or Ginsus. After these 3 items, you don't need more damage items. The only exception is getting Witsend in the build as well. It will be astronomically squishy, but if they're very high AP champs and they have a lot of CC, so imagine they have a Twisted Fate and a Fiddlesticks in the team, what you would do is you would go Merc Treads, Static Shiv into Witsend, Kainic, or much better in my opinion is going Kraken, then Ginsus, and then finishing off with a Kainic. So you just need to like see what the enemies have in their team comp. Now for jungle clearing, ideally you want to start your first clear with a full clear. So whether you start red or blue depends on which lane you want to gank after your first full clear. If you think that neither is gankable, you want to path away from the team that is going to, away from the lane that's going to be stronger and is going to make you harder to secure Scuttle. You really want to get a full clear and a Scuttle, because that will give you 900 gold, which allows you to get a pickaxe, which is the best early game item for Warwick in the game. So actually, full clearing on Warwick has never really been easier, because all we do is at level 1 we start with Q. It is faster than W start. We will smite the Krug like this. And what you want to do on all the camps is you always want to kill the major mob first before all the other mobs. And the reason we do that is because a few patches ago, Warwick got a new mechanic that is called attack speed lingering, which is basically even after you kill a target for 1.25 seconds, you can transfer the attack speed from one target to another. And because our pet basically brings the targets below half HP by itself, and Warwick doesn't have any AoE in this kit, it is simply faster to only focus the main target first, and then kite towards the other camps while the smaller mobs are dying. I hit the small one here by accident. So here, in most games, unless you got a lot of movement speed, you will want to smite the Gromp. Warwick has quite a slow first full clear after the AD nerf that happened recently to compensate for the introduction of attack speed lingering. That was very hard to balance. And you will want to use your E on the camps to lose less HP, unless you're scared that you're going to have to use it when you're going to gank somebody or you're scared to get invaded. And you can see that I will barely make it in time for Scuttle. If you do it completely optimally, it is literally on Scuttle time if there's no W passives kicking in while you're clearing at the early game, right? So here we have 900 gold. I would recall and I would buy a pickaxe. I will reset the game here so we can show the blue side start as well. Again, we start with 1 point into Q. Even though it's 8-second cooldown now at level 1, opposed to how it used to be with 6 seconds for many years in the past, it is still faster than early smiting and using W at level 1 to finish off the camp with the extra attack speed. On top of that, Q also gives us more sustain, so we're going to be healthier in case a potential gank occurs. Realistically, at your first clear, you always don't want to get distracted by anything happening in lanes unless somebody is below 20% HP and it is a guaranteed kill even if they flash away. So you need to be aware of enemy summoner spells and how mobile they are. So I'm going to walk away here. I'll hit this wolf one more time. The other one's going to burn down. We just take a point into E, and we will insta-Q auto and fear the raptors to take less damage and also get an auto attack reset. We will smite the red buff. We do the same thing with E again. By the time we reach Scuttle, it's gonna come back on cooldown. And then if there are no movement speeds on the map, you're gonna arrive at Scuttle at around 333. I did it a little bit suboptimally, but again, we just want to make sure we secure the Scuttle. What you need to be careful in your games is for enemy bot lane comps where they have complete prio over their lane. Because if they're gonna have prio and the jungler is gonna path here and you don't get the Scuttle, your first back will suck. You will not have enough for a pickaxe, and then you will be forced to do something awkward like a Rectric start, which is fine. It is fine, but this feels significantly better since after your first back, major objectives start spawning, like Drake and Grubs. Now, if you don't want to full clear early game, maybe you're playing against full clearers yourself and you don't want them to hyperscale for free into the game. Champions like Fiddlesticks, Canes. You can ask your team to invade early game to put down a ward, and if nobody's showing up, what you can do is you can start either on Wolves and do Wolves, Blue, and Gromp. Get level 3, try to gank bot lane. If there is no opportunity, you don't even show up and you go straight to your Raptors, because once the jungler comes here, they will automatically try to invade. Once he sees his camps are missing, you will do your Raptors and then you can ask your mid laner to fight the jungler here. You can also do the same thing if you do Raptors, Red and Krugs, try to gank top lane, and then, for example, you know, go back to your jungle to farm as well. So that is definitely an option. One thing that is definitely not worth nowadays is to start red and invade and get blue and grump, because realistically he's gonna get 4 camps anyway. If you don't get a gank, the guy has all the time in the world to try to gank something. He'll also get scuttle and his camps are gonna start respawning. It doesn't hurt people that much to get 2 camps stolen, but it does hurt them early game to get 3 of them stolen. In this meta, it is not a great strategy. You're also getting way less XP yourself, because now after taking this, you will have to walk all the way back to your jungle if there are no gank opportunities. And even if there are and you gank them, you will probably have to reset, in which case the enemy jungler just has the option to invade you while you're doing that, which means you won't be able to secure these camps anyway, and he's not really falling behind. Right, now we will move on to a little bit more hidden Warwick interactions, perhaps. Most of these Warwick OGs will probably know, but there are a few new ones considering the changes in this last season to Warwick's kit. So first of all, if I spawn 2 target dummies, there's a new mechanic on Warwick that didn't exist in the past. That's called attack speed lingering, right? So for 1.25 seconds after hitting the previous target, the attack speed will get transferred to any new target. That includes minions and champions. I will probably sell static shift to avoid confusion. So for example, right now I have free attack speed, right? And if I transfer it for a little bit, it's free. Okay, I need to add more health. Okay, let's sell the items. So here I have 2.61 attack speed, and here I have 1.91 until it came below the 20% threshold, and it refreshed to 2.61 on the new target. So basically, even though the new target is full HP, my W bonus attack speed gets transferred, right? Now, one thing to keep in mind, this attack speed will only get transferred if the target is above 50% HP. So for example, if this target that I am transferring attack speed to is below 50%, it will instantly recalculate the attack speed to the below 50% threshold. So for example, if the attack speed below half HP is, let's say, 2 instead of like 2.6, it will automatically, after the first auto, change to 2 until it goes below 20% HP, in where it will, you know, get updated with the new threshold. So basically, to targets that are above half HP, you can transfer the attack speed. Also, if you don't have a lot of attack speed especially in the early game. If I reset the game here, I'll be level 1. If I don't have a lot of attack speed, my second E cast will count as an auto attack reset. That is because they tried to target the fact that in the past, Warwick's E would lock him out of autoing. So if you were in the middle of an auto attack animation and your fear went off, it would cancel your auto that was about to go off. They made it so that after 0.25 seconds of your second E cast, you automatically can auto again. So if you don't have a lot of attack speed, it feels like an auto reset like this. Right? Otherwise, if I just chose to auto normally, it would look like this. Obviously, it's much slower. But if I have a lot of attack speed, for some reason my items are black. Okay, it's good now. Ginsu, Static Kraken, let's say. If I have a lot of attack speed, it will not feel like an auto attack reset because, as I said, it's a fixed 0.25 seconds after your second E. So if I have a lot, it does not even feel like it. And if you have really a lot of attack speed, it will even feel like it still cancels the auto. So early game, use E as an auto attack reset. If you're not building any attack speed items in the game, then it will always stay that way. And if you do, after about like one full item, for example, I love to buy Static Shiv. So after I finish Static Shiv, I just never try to use E as an auto reset anymore. Your ult will automatically make your fear go off if your E is already started before you ult. So for example, if I do this and ult, all the targets nearby will get feared. Let me put this dummy a little bit closer. So like this. You can see that all the targets around got feared. We can also choose to E while flying, and it will flee the targets. So like this. One thing that can be abused is using your E as late as possible before your ult connects. And the reason we want to do that is because even though your ult consumes the fear, it does not consume the damage reduction. We can see here that after it connects, your E is still not going on cooldown until my ult is finished. So for 2.5 seconds, you're getting damage reduction, but the fear goes off instantly. Even though usually if you didn't combine it with your ult, the fear would automatically terminate the damage reduction. So your goal should be to use your E right before connecting with the target to get the longest duration of damage reduction, like this. And then we can see that the fear was still up. Another thing that you should do is whenever you're about to kill a target, if you ult them and they're very low HP, they're very likely to try to panic flash away. In that case, you want to instantly hold Q before your ult even finishes. So I'm already holding my Q, right? There is no reason for me not to if I know that they are likely to flash away. If they are not, it is better to try to do, for example, ulti, then insta E, Q, auto, and E, right? So you're gonna want to do, obviously I have a lot of attack speed, so it's a little bit hard to see, but you can do ult into E first cast, into auto Q auto, into E recast, into auto. Now, one bug that exists in the game that you can technically abuse, but I never do myself, is the fact that once you're ulting somebody, Warwick is not able to use any abilities or item actives, including Zone AS. So for example, if I try to press my Q, now nothing's working. I'm trying to press Q, W, and E. It only goes off after the ult, right? However, if I go here and I put a target dummy in Fog of War and I ult it, if I Q in time, or E in time, or W in time, I will be able to press every single ability before my ult expires. So something like this. So here you saw that I queued at the same time I ulted. You can also hold your Q, even though it's a little bit harder. Like this. And then you can also even press W. The only ability that you cannot use, I believe, is E. Yep. your E is fully locked out. You should be careful when enemies have self-peel abilities that your ult will get cancelled by the same target that you ult. So for example, imagine this is a Kassadin. His Q will silence, right? If he times it correctly, the Q will only land after your ult already connected. Since I'm only unstoppable during the flight, once it connects, if the silence of the Q hits right after, it will automatically cancel the ult. So you need to be very aware of the targets that you are ulting if they are alone, whether they have self-peel. Sometimes it is better to wait for them to use this ability, or you need to make sure that you are ulting them with the surprise element, potentially from Fog of War with a lot of movement speed. Another thing that you can do is you can Q over short walls. Another tip would be to, when you're scared of getting hit by multiple abilities, to hold your Q as much as possible, because the longer you hold your Q until the max duration, the longer you are immune to displacements. Instead of just doing midway, because you can make it count as a dash, but you can release it sooner than waiting the full duration and like stand somewhere in the middle, for example. Q no longer follows teleports, but it is possible to Q somebody when they're recalling and follow them into fountain and die from it. And one final mechanic that I don't use as much as I should is a new mechanic where you can QW a target at the same time. It is almost seamless. There's a little bit lockout animation because W lasts longer than Q. But the reason why sometimes you might want to use it is because, well, W lasts quite a while to cast. If we take a look like this, it's basically a full second, right? And you get a very nice attack speed steroid against full HP targets. I think the best situation to use it for is when an enemy is inside a bush and you don't have vision of them and they're about to hard engage on you, but you don't know that. So as soon as they engage on you, you react by QWing at the same time if they're full HP. Basically, trying to give yourself as much of a damage boost in an extended fight as possible. I imagine somebody like a Xyllow collapsing on me in the jungle while having vision advantage where I could use this to some benefit. I also think that for top lane, this is potentially much more abusable because sometimes, you know, usually you're just going to press W before engaging into the fight, but there are situations where you might not be able to do so. So just something to keep in mind. If you actually manage to sit through all of this content, you're absolutely crazy, and I have not a single doubt in my mind that you will climb from Iron 4 to Challenger in a span of 2 weeks. Please let me know your progress and what you've learned. Please ask me any questions that you're unsure about on the YouTube comments. I know that it is impossible to tell you absolutely everything there is to know. Some information is jungle specific, not really Warwick specific. There's also matchup information that I did not really cover. There is a specific reason for that. I don't think that the jungle is as it used to be. You're not exactly facing the enemy jungler. You're really facing the whole enemy team, and covering every single champion would just be cumbersome, I believe. I really hope you guys enjoyed, and see you guys in the nearby future.